Hi guys, Forgotten Wolf here, and this is Game of Thrones House of Season 2. We are back, this time, for the Wildlings. We're going over the wars that happens between them and everything in Game of Thrones. This is the history of the Wildlings. Once again, Game of Thrones Season 2, part of a massive build-up to a massive video, so please like, share, and subscribe, and with that out of the way, let's begin. Unlike the great houses or the Night's Watch, the Wildlings aren't their own house. They are a group of people in various clans beyond the wall, like the Fens, the Horncrows, the Giants. We can pinpoint the exact moment the Wildlings became known as the Wildlings, being 8,000 years before the main Game of Thrones show, when Brandon the Builder built a wall in order to keep out the White Walkers out of Westeros, and the Wildlings, more specifically, they helped build it, as more specifically Giants. Because of this, the Wildlings don't have the same practices as the rest of the realm, including their concept of marriage being stealing a wildling girl from another tribe or house, and that's their sign of marriage. The Wildlings don't call themselves Wildlings, instead they call themselves the Free Folk, as they are free from Westeros and don't have any lords and rarely have kings. The Wildlings, because of their status beyond the wall, stayed out of Westeros politics for a very, very, very long time, until the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, being Night's King, who practiced cruelty and broke his vows. This meant that the Wildlings had to team up with the Stark King at the time, who was king in the north, and they had to take him down. For hundreds of years, the Wildlings would try to get past the wall with the various kings beyond the wall, but we have no record of the names of them, and every time, House Stark and the Night's Watch were there to stop them, although it was more so House Stark, as the the Night's Watch became weaker and weaker. This was until 288 AC, when the Wildlings were, like usual, divided, fighting each other. However, Mance Rayder, at the time a member of the Night's Watch, was treated by Wildlings, and one thing led to another, and he left the Night's Watch, going to the Wildlings. Mance Rayder would spend the rest of his life trying to unite hundreds of Wildlings, but first he started with the Stirs, the Thenn clan, and Tormund Giantsbane by beating them in combat and killing their leaders, with the exception of Tormund, obviously, who he spared. For the next 10 years, Mance Rayder would gather hundreds of Wildlings clan to follow them, with the eventual goal of going south beyond the wall to protect them from winter, as they knew what lied beyond the wall, the White Walkers. However, House Stark was still around, so Mance couldn't make a march on the wall. This all changed in 298 AC, as the Night's Watch blamed the Wildlings for the disappearance of Benjen Stark, which in reality the Wildlings had zero part in, but Mance Rayder also learned about Lord Ned Stark's execution and the breakout of the War of the Five Kings, meaning the North was generally undefended and weak. Mance Rayder began marshalling his forces, seeing this as a perfect time to strike against the wall and the Watch, as the Watch was more poorly manned beyond the wall, and Robb Stark was in the south. In 299 AC, while moving to the Fist of the First Men, the Wildlings would take two prisoners, Jon Snow, Ned Stark's bastard, and Qhorin Halfhand. While the Halfhand was killed by Jon Snow, Snow would be kept as a prisoner by Mance himself, as he wanted information out of him. Jon Snow revealed that Castle Black and only two other castles remained manned along the wall. However, he lied about the true counts of the Night's Watch, saying there were like 10,000 men. And in 300 AC, Mance Rayder sent Jon Snow, Ygritte, Tormund, Horel, and a few other Wildlings to climb the wall and lead a raid on the wall, while Mance attacks it. More specifically, Castle Black, the main stationed castle of the wall. They did so, but Jon Snow attacked the Wildlings at Queen's Crow, the village, and he left to go back to the Watch, betraying the Wildlings, buying the Night's Watch some much-needed time, more specifically 1 year. Eventually, in 301 AC, Mance Rayder and the Wildlings attacked on the wall, and on day one of the Battle of the Wall, the Night's Watch came out victorious, largely thanks to Jon Snow, as they defeated the raiders on the wall, with Tormund Giantsbane being taken prisoner, while the rest who raided the wall would be killed, including Ygritte. However, on day 2 of the battle, the Wildlings would lose the battle and the war against the Night's Watch, thanks to King Stannis Baratheon, who came to the aid of the Night's Watch and beat the Wildlings thanks to Tormund, their horses. Stannis would take Mance Rayder prisoner, and a few Wildlings stuck around, and in 302 AC, a majority of the Wildlings left the wall that year to go to a place called Hardhome, but Tormund and Mance were still prisoners. Mance refused to bend the knee to Stannis Baratheon, which led to Stannis attempting to burn Mance alive, but Jon Snow killed him with an arrow to the heart out of respect. Stannis would eventually leave the Wall, while Tormund would be freed by Jon Snow, who is now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, as Jon Snow wanted to save the Wildlings from the White Walkers, as thanks to the trip beyond the Wall and what the Wildlings had said, he knew the White Walkers were coming, and he wanted every person to be united against the White Walkers. Thus, Tormund, Ed, another Night's Watch brother, and Jon Snow traveled to Hardhome, bringing a few ships to bring the Wildlings south. But when they got there, Tormund had to fight off the Magnar Fen and other Wildlings that opposed him, but eventually the Wildlings agreed to go with Jon south. But the trio of Tormund, Ed, and Jon had walked directly into the Battle of Hardhome, as in the battle, the Wildling rescue was ongoing. The White Walkers attacked Hardhome, and Jon Snow and a few others had to fight off the White Walkers while the Wildlings were escaping. Jon Snow killed Ice Warden, as Game of Thrones legends call the White Walker that he killed, and he would be truly terrified for the first time in his life. He left the Wall with Tormund and He left the Hardhome with Tormund and Ed, overall saving 2,000 Wildlings that day, and would allow them south of the Wall in a little place called the Gift, which was under the protection of the Night's Watch, in order to protect them from the White Walkers, as I said earlier. When the other Wildlings that were dead, that were not rescued, would be resurrected by the Night King and became White Walkers. We don't have an official count of how many White Walkers became White Walkers, but the Wildlings had roughly 100,000 men marching on the Wall. We can assume roughly 50,000 died to Stannis, so we can assume roughly around 30,000 died. Although that's just an estimate by my standards, that could be completely wrong. The Wildlings would have a great ally in Jon Snow, as he protected them. He vouched for them as he wanted them to be useful in the battle against the White Walkers. However, his brothers on the Night's Watch disagreed, killing Jon Snow in a mutiny following Stannis' loss and the Battle of Ice. In response, Ed would go to get the Wildlings, while Tormund would help defend Jon Snow's corpse. We'll see why later. When Ed got to where the Wildlings were, the Wildlings answered the call, and in 303 AC, after thousands of years of trying to beat the Night's Watch, the Wildlings finally done it, taking the mutineers prisoner and pretty much ending the Night's Watch's relevance and the Night's Watch in general. But in order to progress to further greats and defeat the White Walkers, the Wildlings really needed a commander. Enter Melisandre, Stannis' Red Priestess, who worked magic on Jon Snow's body, and after being killed, Melisandre would resurrect Jon Snow. The Wildlings would watch as the now resurrected Jon Snow executed the 4 mutineers responsible for his death, and after that, Jon Snow declared his Night's Watch days over, saying, "My watch is ended." He is now free from his vows, and essentially Jon Snow wouldn't become a Wildling, but the Wildlings, the 2,000 men he saved, would be an army for Jon Snow. That does it for me, and now that Night's Watch vows for Jon Snow are no longer, we will return down south to House Frey for the next part, coming in May. But until next time, bye!